Hi, I'm Courtney, and this is my portfolio. As a Black, cisgender, heterosexual woman from a family of college educated individuals, I navigate intersections of privilege and marginalization. My socioeconomic background spans across the middle class, and as a documented U.S. citizen by birth, I have had the privilege of freedoms, such as the legal right to marry freely before 2015, that have not always been universally afforded. Coming from a family of educated people, I understand that the way I navigate the world looks different than those who do not. I see and understand the privilege it is to acquire higher education. I acknowledge that I currently live in Tennessee, having originally come from Alabama, on lands historically inhabited by and violently taken from the Cherokee, Shawnee, Yuchi, Chickasaw, and Muskogee peoples. These experiences shape my perspective as I engage in class discussions. I am committed to exploring the complexities within multiple perspectives and understanding how systems of power influence access to education and opportunity. This awareness will guide my approach to fostering inclusivity and respect for diverse experiences. As a Black, cisgender, heterosexual woman from a family of educated individuals, I have navigated the intersections of privilege and marginalization. My socioeconomic background includes a middle class upbringing, and as a documented U.S. citizen by birth, I have enjoyed certain freedoms, such as the legal right to marry freely before 2015, that have not always been universally granted. Growing up in a family of educated individuals, I recognize that my experience of the world differs from those who may not share the same advantages. I see and appreciate the privilege of obtaining higher education. I acknowledge that I currently reside in Tennessee, having originally come from Alabama, on lands historically inhabited by and forcefully taken from the Cherokee, Shawnee, Yuchi, Chickasaw, and Muskogee peoples. These experiences shape my perspective as I participate in class discussions. I am committed to exploring the complexities within multiple viewpoints and understanding how systems of power affect access to education and opportunity. This awareness will inform my approach to promoting inclusivity and respect for diverse experiences. So, my positionality statement didn't have many changes, but I did make a few. The first one was to change the wording around my socioeconomic background. In my first one, I say that my socioeconomic background spans across the middle class. And then in my revised one, I changed it to say that it includes a middle class upbringing. I think that saying that it includes a middle class upbringing lets you know that I was raised middle class, and then it also leaves room for me to grow outside of that. It just makes it more clear for the reader where I was in life and where I'm headed. Um, so I changed it to say include. And then the second change that I made was to make it more clear that my worldview was different from those who didn't experience the same um, upbringing as me, as far as being in an educated home or being in an educated family. Um, in my first statement, I say, coming from a family of educated people, I understand that the way I navigate the world looks different than those who do not. Um, so it was a little confusing reading it over because I just stop at those who do not what experience life or have an educated family. So in my updated one, I wrote it as growing up in a family of educated individuals. I recognize that my experience of the world differs from those who may not share the same advantages. It just makes it more clear that I'm talking about having educated people in your family or just constantly being around educated family members. Um, I also wanted to touch on why I added growing up in an educated family in general, just because that's a big part of who I am. It shapes my personality and my lifestyle. not all of my family members have a college education, but the people who I was around the most, and yeah, the people who I was around the most are those who had college educations, and their experiences and the knowledge they passed on to me shaped my life. And so I felt it was important to add that into my positionality statement because it is a big factor in how I navigate the world. So for the anti-racism module, we had talked about principles of liberation psychology, and one of these principles was denaturalization. And this is questioning the systems that we treat as normal that reinforce racism. Um, a real world example that I could think of was how predominantly black schools are um, having a decrease in federal funding due to performance. And I thought that was interesting because the predominantly white schools compared to predominantly black schools, they vary widely in resources. It's most likely that a predominantly white school will have more advanced resources. So performance would show something different than a predominantly black school with outdated resources. To base, in my opinion, to base performance knowing that the resources vary so widely is ill advised, and it's obviously blatantly racist. This is X assignment 3, and this assignment helped me to understand how racism isn't just a one-dimensional thing. Like, you there are racists, and then there are undercover racists, and I think this assignment helped me to realize how institutionally racists can carry out their hatred and on a broader level. Going into the first one, interpersonal, this is the most common one that and the one I'm most familiar with. Um, this is hatred for another person. This is probably like the basic level. I would consider the basic level of racism. And it shows up as stereotyping and discrimination. Um, Ways to challenge this would just be to call people out whenever they exhibit any form of racism, microaggression, anything like that. The next one is internalized. Um, I knew this one. I knew this form of racism. I never personally dealt with this, but even though I participated in like this, the way it shows up, I participated in straightening my hair. I did it for style and not to feel not black, really. Yeah. Um, but internalized racism can be dangerous when it comes to one's identity and something that really you can't change, but some people bleach their skin to try to change it. But ultimately, like, your features are still there. Well, you can change those too with plastic surgery, but it's just you trying to go through all of that just to be presenting as not black. It's a big hassle. Structural racism. These are embedded within our communities. This is racism that is embedded in our communities. So, unfair treatment of black people from law enforcement. We've seen that time and time again. And whenever we see it, it only results in an officer getting paid suspension, or maybe they'll have to take a cultural diversity training course, but it's as a punishment, and things like that should not be punishments because then it prompts people to not care about cultural diversity unless they do something wrong. Um, and then the second way it shows up, I put for this is more often than not, Black communities are labeled food deserts because most predominantly Black communities are often the ones that don't have access to fresh produce. Um, and so they're labeled food deserts, and this is all structural. This is made this way. Um, yeah, it's made. The system is made that way to not provide those kind of resources to predominantly black communities. The last we have is institutional. So what I was talking about earlier, reducing funding to predominantly black schools that are quote unquote low performing, when in reality it's not having adequate resources in order to have a well-rounded education and high performance or just good performance in general. And another is denying black mothers in labor pain medication. It is a widely known fact that health providers um, ignore the cries and the pleas of black people in general, really, when they express having pain because it's a racist assumption and a stereotype that black people can handle more pain than any other ethnicity. If I were to teach someone the concept of anti racism, I would first ask them a series of questions like, what does racism mean to you? With that question, I could get a scope of where their thinking is based on racism. If they're saying racism means being called a slur or um, not being let in somewhere just based on your color of your skin, I can understand that they have like a pretty basic understanding of racism. But if someone were to also say racism is living in a predominantly black neighborhood and not having a grocery store in your area for 30 minutes, it's not, it takes 30 minutes to get to the nearest grocery store, and you live in a city, that lets me know they have a little bit more of a well-rounded understanding of what racism is. They're getting more into the structural understanding of it, rather than just focusing on the interpersonal. When I think about the four dimensions, um, I feel like to understand racism in general, if you want to teach somebody racism, you have to take them through those as if they're stages rather than just forms of racism. Because people usually understand and know interpersonal, but when you get into internalized, structural, and institutional, it gets bigger and bigger. Um, yeah, I really feel like if you're gonna teach someone about racism, you take them through the four dimensions as if they're stages. Um, First, it's you and someone else, interpersonal, and then it's internalized. So with other people of color or other African Americans, it will really help them and it might resonate with them to be able to say, okay, well, yeah, I grew up in a predominantly white community, but I am African American and I did some of these things, and it might be something that's considered internalized racism, and that would help them to further understand the concept before you take them to structural in how a community can be set up to be racist, and then institutional, because it's just this big idea of the whole world you live in is built to be against you and racist towards you because you're black. That's that's how I would take someone through it. Stages instead of dimensions. So in the allyship module, one of the concepts that really intrigued me was transformative justice, which is the community-based strategies that get to the root of a problem. So thinking of transformative justice, I thought of how balls got started, like balls with categories, and how it created a space for um, the LGBTQIA community to go there and be their full authentic selves, while also competing amongst one another to be celebrated and put in the spotlight when they're not treated that way in reality or in the outside world or the world outside of the ball, you know? So I felt that there was a really good example of transformative justice. In order to show my engagement with the allyship module, I decided to revisit my X5 assignment where I created an action plan for housing discrimination. The first step of this plan was to acknowledge the impact. So I looked up statistics on discriminatory complaints made by people. 17.5 of these complaints were based on sex, 17.6 were based on race, and then 53.6 were based on disability. The next step of this plan was to identify barriers, and the two barriers that I want to discuss are lending practices and selective advertising. Lending practices by banks is commonly known, and it favors majority demographics over minority demographics, and they just limit the access. This is limiting access to housing for marginalized communities. And then selective advertising is purposefully not advertising to the demographics you don't want to sell to. The next step was to take action. What specifically can be done for this? The first thing I have is to file more lawsuits. People usually don't jump to filing a lawsuit unless there's a blatant or obvious evidence towards discrimination. And sometimes housing discrimination can be very subtle. So whenever a person whenever a person is in a situation where they have all the information or they have all the paperwork, they meet all the requirements, but they don't get the home for whatever reason, and it's not even sold to anybody else, they just don't get the home, that's grounds to file a lawsuit. And then I have creating policies to eliminate housing discrimination. And I have this quote here that says, selling to the best buyer, not the best looking buyer. Making sure that sellers are not honing in on how the buyer or how the buyer looks, or what their skin color is, how old they are, if they have disabilities, can they afford the home? That's all you really need to worry about. And then the last step I have is creating and maintaining long-term system changes. And then two of these system changes I have are third-party advisory, which is not ideal, but um, it's some type of solution. Third-party advisory is when you have someone else go to the meetings for you and turn in all the paperwork for you. that person is who the seller sees and they never see you. It's not ideal because you want to be able to interact with the person who's selling you your home. And then I have adjusting the market and having um, anonymous buyers. So if there's a system where people can buy a home anonymously, and when I say anonymous, I just mean that their demographic information is not um, put out, or it's not given to the buyer or the seller. Um, that would be a good system. If I know in order to buy a home, you need to verify your identity. And if there's a system where a person can verify their identity with a company and or a system like a digital system that just does a background check on them, something like that, and then only thing that the seller sees is that this person has been approved by the system, and then they can move forward from there. That would work much better than a third party advisory. Um, but yes, that's my action plan. We stand as one, hand in hand, not to lead, but to understand. With open hearts and open eyes, we lift the truth, no alibis. Arms linked like unbreakable chains, we hold the line with joys and pains. It's not the spotlight, not the stage, but showing up and holding space. We won't be silent, won't look away. We'll walk beside you every day. Through pain and progress, joy and strife, we pledge our presence, share the fight. For allyship is more than a word, it's felt in action, seen and heard. We rise as many, not as one, until the work is all done. If I were to teach someone about allyship, I would start with asking them what genuinely helping someone means to them. I feel like it's a good question to ask someone to get them to start thinking about um, helping someone without expecting recognition or reward, because that's what an ally does. An ally doesn't expect anything from you. They're helping you simply because they want to help you and because they want to see you succeed. From the advocacy module, a concept that inspired me was the what is it called again? Intergenerational trauma. I actually did this painting right here. I actually did that painting based on intergenerational trauma, and that kind of trauma is so deep seated in the Black community, and it's one of the reasons we should push for more therapeutic solutions, because holistic in general, more holistic solutions to help people understand that who you are, what you're afraid of, it's not it's because of something that happened to your ancestors that got passed down to their children and got passed on to, it's like it keeps going. And I feel like people think that it is a hocus pocus kind of thing to have this fear and anxiety from your ancestors that were enslaved. And I wish more people understood, because like people can be upset that their ancestors were enslaved, but they're not gonna acknowledge that they still reap the misfortunes and the how can I say it? Like they have the anxiety still within them from that that very anxiety that their ancestors felt while they were running away from enslavers is inside you. And I wish more people knew that. So in order to show my engagement with this module, I decided to revisit my Act 7 assignment, where I created actionable steps to support Black students' mental health. And for this, I had to make a list of um, things that could actually be done, actions that could be taken in order to better, for universities to better support the mental health of Black students. And the one I favored the most was counseling centers having events maybe once a semester in order to introduce themselves to the student community. Um, a lot of times students are not going to um, go out of their way to see where the counseling center is. So they need to come to the students. Um, it relieves some of the pressure of having to search for help when help is there for you and it can come to you. And it's also I think it's just a way to open up the students to the possibilities of counseling. And whenever something, not just for when tragedy happens, like something very unnerving happens, but also for when they're having some anxieties about homework or exams, because even then, you still need help just because it's an exam and not some life threatening event or life changing event, life altering event, whatever. Just because it's not that, it can still have the same effect on you if your body and your mind and your mentality are responding in the same ways. So, yeah, that's what I feel. I feel like the counseling center should do more outreach towards the student community. I wanted to revisit my integrative discussion 7, and I was reading over my um, discussion, and a little bit of it reads that racial advocacy would work to help Black students feel more included in their own communities. The question brought up culturally competent counseling. Um, to have proper counseling that is fit with standards to meet the needs of Black students would be a major step forward, as psychology was not made with our ethnicity in mind. Um, and just thinking about a counseling, how counseling could fit around a Black student and how innovative that is, because psychology was not made for us or not made with us in mind, and how we've had to fit ourselves into the structure of psychology as it is. um, I just thought that the idea of having a counseling process fit for me and my culture and what I've experienced is something I would like to see. Um, I was also responding to someone by saying cultural competency training is a must. Um, for staff that are not of the African American community that work on an HBCU campus should have training specific to helping them understand the culture they're about to enter, because this is very different, especially people who are coming from other universities that are maybe PWI or just not other HBCUs, or they're just coming from another school that's not a HBCU. They should definitely be taking some type of training to educate them on the culture, the dynamics of students in HBCU, um, because you don't want them to be lost when things happen. You don't want them to question or try to integrate anything they had going on at their other schools culturally, um, that would culturally harm Black students. You don't want them doing that, so they need to be educated on what HBCU culture is like. This module helped me to understand how, when viewing advocacy or when you're dealing with advocacy, you really have to look at if you're advocating for a certain or if you're advocating for a particular group of people, you really have to look at that group of people and their whole experience rather than a specific experience that they have. You have to see how they experience life at work, home, school, all of it in order to come up with any type of solution that's going to work for them.